Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer because today we are completely dismantling a really popular historical myth. For the longest time, the standard narrative has been that the European Renaissance just kind of spontaneously emerged out of the so-called Dark Ages. Like Europe just woke up one morning and suddenly remembered all those ancient Greek and Roman texts. But, history is rarely ever that simple, and it's certainly never that disconnected. So we really have to ask ourselves, where did this massive, sudden explosion of European knowledge actually come from? I mean, how did medieval Europe suddenly acquire the advanced medical, astronomical, and philosophical texts that practically fueled the Renaissance? Well, the answer doesn't lie in some random European awakening. It actually traces directly back to the brilliant pioneering scholars of Al-Andalus, which was Islamic Spain.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The spark of Al-Andalus. 2. Pioneers of flight and stars. 3. Masters of modern medicine. 4. Averroes, the great thinker. 5. The Toledo translation engine. And finally, 6. Sparking the European Renaissance.
Section 1. The Spark of Al-Andalus, the multicultural intellectual hub. Now, back in the 10th century, the Iberian Peninsula was this incredibly unique polyglot society. You literally had Arabic, Hebrew, Latin, and local Romance dialects all coexisting. And this synthesis created an atmosphere that was practically engineered for intellectual breakthroughs. Just think about this staggering number for a second. 400,000. That's the estimated number of volumes housed in the vast Caliphal library in Córdoba during the 10th century, under rulers like El-Hakam II. While a lot of medieval Europe was struggling with really fragmented, localized knowledge, Córdoba was acting like this massive magnet for global wisdom, actively collecting, translating, and synthesizing texts from all over the known world.
Moving to Section 2. Pioneers of flight and stars, the dreamers and the observers.
So let's step outside those quiet libraries and meet the individuals who are actually studying the skies. We're going to focus on two pioneers in engineering and astronomy who entirely refused to just accept the world as it was. First up is the 9th century polymath Abbas ibn Firnas. And the thing you've got to understand about him is his sheer, unbounded genius. He's famously reported to have literally covered himself in feathers, strapped on some wings, and launched himself into the air in a very early attempt at unpowered flight. And he actually flew a considerable distance, though he did end up hurting his back pretty badly because, as historians noted, he completely forgot to build a tail for the landing. But his brilliance went way beyond that. He figured out how to manufacture colorless glass from quartz and used that to invent reading stones, which are the direct ancestors of the glasses we wear today. He also built complex water clocks and even an early metronome. The guy was a tinkerer of the absolute highest order. Next, we have to look at a man who turned his gaze directly to the cosmos. Maslama al-Majriti, also known as the Observer. Born in Madrid around 950 CE, he eventually moved to Córdoba and fundamentally changed how astronomy was done. In 979 CE, he conducted the very first recorded independent stellar observation in the region, precisely calculating the longitude of the star Regulus at 135 degrees and 40 minutes. He adapted ancient Persian astronomical tables specifically for the Andalusian skies and went on to found a highly organized school of astronomy in Córdoba that literally trained generations of scientists. And this is exactly why these scholars were such game changers. They weren't just guessing. They absolutely weren't just blindly copying ancient texts. They were actively inventing and iterating on the scientific method. Scholars like al-Majriti heavily emphasized practical calibration and hands-on empirical observation. Basically, if an ancient Greek text said one thing, but their astrolabe in the actual night sky showed another, they trusted the observation. Section 3. Masters of Modern Medicine, the Healers of Al-Andalus. Now, Córdoba very quickly became the absolute go-to destination for anyone seeking advanced healing and state-supervised medical care. And you just cannot talk about medieval medicine without bringing up Al-Zahrawi, known in the Latin world as Albuquerque. Born in 937, he authored this incredibly comprehensive surgical encyclopedia. When his work was eventually translated into Latin, it quite literally became the foundational manual for European medicine. He was this monumental figure whose texts taught countless generations of European surgeons the precise art of cutting, cauterizing, splinting, and clinical diagnosis. So the real takeaway here is the stark contrast between the kind of stagnant medical practices common in much of the world at that time and the highly specialized, rigorously tested medical industry that was thriving in Islamic Spain. Before this, medicine was often just philosophical guesswork. But in Al-Andalus, doctors actually had to pass state-supervised exams and take oaths before they were allowed to practice. We even see the birth of distinct medical specialties. They had dedicated orthopedic surgeons, internal medicine specialists, pediatricians, and yes, even psychiatrists. It was a remarkably sophisticated healthcare system.
Section 4. Averroes, the Great Thinker. Philosophy meets groundbreaking medicine. Let's jump into the 12th century and talk about the philosopher and physician Averroes, who fundamentally influenced the course of thought in both the Islamic East and the Christian West. This guy was not afraid to completely correct ancient Greek assumptions, and he made some unbelievable medical leaps in his renowned encyclopedia, the Kulliyat fi al-Tibb. For example, he broke away from the deeply held traditional belief that the lens of the eye was responsible for vision and correctly proved that it's actually the retina that senses light. He also threw out ancient theories about strokes, correctly identifying that they originate in the brain because of obstructed arteries. And incredibly, he was the very first physician to accurately describe the signs and symptoms of what we now call Parkinson's disease. I absolutely love this quote from him. Medicine is an art whose action is preserving health and curing disease based on science and experience. It just perfectly encapsulates the entire Andalusian mindset. He saw medicine not as some kind of magic or superstition, but as an applied art that heavily relies on science and direct observable experience. He was constantly prioritizing empirical data over a blind faith in antiquity. But of course, Averroes was perhaps even more famous as a philosopher. In a time when theological traditionalists, like the scholar Al-Ghazali, viewed Aristotelian philosophy as irreligious and really attacked it, Averroes totally stood his ground. He passionately and methodically defended the strict compatibility of logical philosophy, human reason, and religion. His commentaries on Aristotle were so profound that they would eventually spark massive intellectual debates over in Christian Europe centuries later, even prompting direct critiques from major historical figures like Thomas Aquinas. Section 5. The Toledo Translation Engine, the Great Transmission of Knowledge. So how did all of this incredible knowledge, the astronomy, the medicine, the groundbreaking philosophy, actually cross over into the rest of Europe? Well, that vehicle was the Toledo School of Translators. After Toledo was conquered by Christian forces, it remained this wonderfully multicultural city. Scholars literally flocked there to gather source texts in Arabic, Hebrew, and Greek. Then, heavily supported by rulers like King Alfonso X, these scholars painstakingly translated these massive complex works into Latin and later into Castilian. From there, these newly translated Latin texts were distributed all across the continent, becoming the foundational textbooks for the brand new universities that were just starting to spring up in Europe. You really can't overstate the ripple effect of the Toledo School. Seriously, without this specific, rigorous translation engine, the works of Aristotle, plus all the groundbreaking additions by scholars like Avicenna, Al-Zahrawi, and Averroes, would have remained completely lost to the Christian world. By translating texts into Castilian, they also helped elevate it into the standard language of Spain. But most importantly, Toledo was the ultimate crossroads that delivered centuries of Andalusian empirical breakthroughs directly into the hands of medieval Europe. They literally set the stage for the scientific revolution. Section 6. Sparking the European Renaissance, the enduring bridge to the modern world. So, as we wrap up this explainer, let's tie all these threads together. From Ibn Firnas's reading stones that eventually gave us eyeglasses, to Moslama al-Majrisi's precision astrolabes, to Al-Zahrawi's foundational surgical techniques, and Averroes' passionate defense of pure reason, it was the intense intellectual rigor of Islamic scholars in Al-Andalus that provided the very foundation for the European awakening. The Renaissance definitely didn't emerge from a vacuum. It was built directly on the meticulously translated pages of Andalusian science. So, I want to leave you with a pretty big question to chew on. If the scholars of Al-Andalus hadn't built this bridge of knowledge, would the modern world as we know it even exist today? When we look at the timeline of human progress, it's just so easy to skip straight from ancient Rome right to the European Renaissance. But by doing that, we totally erase the vital multicultural bridge that made the modern world possible. I really encourage you to look closer at these unseen forces and the forgotten dreamers who truly engineered our modern scientific reality. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.